Hello, and welcome to episode 452 of Retro Encounter, RPG fans' bi-weekly podcast of many topics. I'm not going to get used to saying bi-weekly anytime soon. We are here today to discuss the second half, or really more like the second two-thirds, of Final Fantasy IX, that 1990 or 2000 RPG for the PlayStation 1 that has sort of achieved classic status in the last 25 years, and I think deservedly so. There's a lot to talk about. There's so much going on at the end of this game. I really enjoyed my time with it. But let's talk to three other people who I'm guessing also enjoyed their time with it, starting with you, Rob.
Hi.
And Mario.
Hello, hello.
And Wes.
Hi, everybody.
Well, thank you three for joining me so much. Last time we sort of ended at the sort of like going to the outer continent. And I thought because I first set like the cut point, like, oh, this is where we'll stop. I'm like, oh, that feels about right. And then I realized that like almost all of the plot happens after that. So we have a lot to cover today. We're going to definitely kind of bounce around a little bit. And, we're not going to cover every single little detail and plot point because we just can't. But this game is worth that. So out of curiosity, just sort of as a general opening conversation, how did you guys feel in this second portion of the game, coming back to it? Did it live up to your memories? Did you enjoy it as much as you remember?
Honestly, maybe better than I remember in some ways. Like, you get enough distance and you forget exactly how much the game decides to do with its themes in the back half. Um, for me, it's rare for a long RPG to really stick the landing. And yeah, one or two missteps that are widely documented and will certainly be spoken of here aside. I think FF9 mostly nails it all the way through. And the depth of what happens in the back half of the game is maybe not remembered as well as it could be sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with Wes. I feel like, yeah, I think part of it also for me is on subsequent playthroughs compared to like my first one. I'm at least prepared for some of the aforementioned wild parts like over and the desert palace and all that. Like I feel on subsequent playthroughs, I know that's coming up, so I know kind of how to better handle it. So it kind of just helps with the whole flow of this second portion of the game. Um, but yeah, and yeah, the ending, yeah, we'll get to it when we get to it. But yeah, I agree, this is a very strong, like FF9 sticks to it throughout the entire game. So I'm very, yeah, this, having that pacing sort of resolved itself with like having that knowledge, it's, yeah, I think more enjoyable than like my first time playthrough.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's been said generally. I think I maybe enjoy the first half of the game slightly more just because I think it kind of shows off slightly better maybe what makes Final Fantasy IX so unique. And I think I find the sort of second half of the game, it maybe becomes a bit more kind of conventional and um, follows a sort of fairly similar Final Fantasy-esque design, I suppose. Like I like things like the split storylines in the first half, and I don't know. I guess when everything becomes a bit sort of grander and world affecting, it becomes a bit more sort of traditional and expected, I suppose. But that doesn't mean that it's bad for sure. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, because I think that the first half it's sort of a little bit lighter in tone, and of course, like it's always going to happen in almost any Final Fantasy game, right? Like, oh, it's lighter, and then like the world's going to end if you do not fix this. But I do think that they still manage, even in some of like the darker moments, to bring some levity to it. But you're right. I mean, like the party pretty much at the beginning of Disc 3 for the most part, except for a couple splits here and there, which are in some cases a little annoying in my opinion. For the most part, like your party is together, and so it is more traditional in that way. I agree with pretty much everything you guys have said. I think that I think this is a game that you appreciate more as you're older in some ways. At least for me, I do. Maybe because I'm 39 and about to turn 40, and I worry about dying sometimes. So this I think this game gets to some of those things pretty interestingly. And I think that it kind of starts right where we are about to start off here. Like we start, our conversation will start when we go to the outer continent, and the first place you go when you get to the outer continent is the Black Mage Village, and you start interacting with this group of people who all know that their lifespan is short and they're all going to die. Or yeah, how do they put it? They're going to stop functioning, or they're going to stop. Is that what they say?
Yeah, I think they say they stop moving or something like
They
that.
stop moving. Yeah. And Vivi's been sort of struggling with his own identity, but now we sort of really start getting into this concept of life and death, and like the concept of what do you do with the time you have, and what do you do about the fact that we're all going to end up in the same place eventually. And I think that it reminds me of a book that a guy named Ishiguro wrote, "Never Let Me Go," where they have all these clones who are all going to die when they're very young because they're getting farmed for parts, and it's all about sort of like what do you squeeze out of that that short span of time, and what do we all squeeze out of it? So that's a lot of me philosophizing.
I think it's really interesting and fascinating to see how, Vivi is not alone in this. That these creations aren't, he's not an accident. They aren't all mindless, automatons or what have you. And seeing this group of people who have come to peace with the fact that their life is limited. And yeah, there's still fear, there's still concern there, but um this, what I would want to call a positive outlook, I guess, or just an acceptance. It handles, grief in a really interesting way. The idea that um you can almost grieve before something's happened in order to move on and make the most of what you have left. And um this idea of, it's almost that joy de vivre, like you got to enjoy it while you can. But it's all in this very calm state, in a way that almost seems ominous at points. But um there's this amount of acceptance that's really fascinating, I think.
I like that it is like it's really obviously tackling some quite deep stuff, this part of the story, when you get there. But I enjoy this kind of contrast with the sort of slightly funny kind of performative stuff that the black mages are doing, because they think that that's what they should be doing from what they know of like the outside world, which is not very much because they're so cut off from everything else. But like they think they have to have shops, and they think that that's how that you run a shop. And those kind of moments add like a slight bit of humor to it, which I appreciate for sure. But I think it also means that the sort of heavier stuff hits a bit harder for me. That's kind of how I found it anyway. It gives you a more kind of round view, I suppose, of what's going on in that place. um but yeah, just having that slightly kind of lighter side to it, I think, yeah, gives the story a bit more impact when it's tackling the heavier stuff.
I was gonna shout out the soundtrack for this place 'cause I love this rendition of Vivi's theme. Like this area and this section of the game really is like tackling, of course, like um themes of like death and life and doing what we can with the time we have and all that. But it's still like a very upbeat song, and I don't know, it does kind of capture that like lightheartedness feel as well of like um yeah, they're obviously they've confronted death and all these things. But yeah, they've accepted it. They're able to have their own settlement and everything. Like, yeah, I love this section of the game and sort of what the parallels it draws with like Zidane's own arc, like later on in the story, is also very great. Yeah, this my phone background is Vivi with the chocobo raising them. It's like a fan art, but yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I'm glad you talked about the chocobo because this is skipping ahead a little bit here, but
yeah, that
whatever.
is skipping a bit. Yeah,
Yeah, but like later on, as you guys remember, many of these black mages are sort of manipulated by Kuja to go, extend their life, but really just to be his weapons. And they don't know what else to do, but there are two or three, I think, black mages who stay behind to raise, to like watch over a chocobo egg. And then when it hatches, I can't remember what name they give it, but it's something like super funny. What's the name they give that chocobo? Someone let me know if you remember, but they give it like this super normal sounding name. But just like the joy of like that sort of cycle and like them taking care of a new life as they know theirs is going away. I actually think that's just like the most lovely part of this story. And I think that also like what you were talking about with Zidane, like a lot of these characters sort of like have like these roles they're supposed to play. Like they're sort of our puppets in their own way, right? Like these guys are puppets. Zidane is a puppet in his own way. Garnet is, Steiner is, Vivi of course is, and sort of people navigating like what they were quote unquote created to be, and then what they were supposed to be, and then who they want to be. And I do think that this section gets to that the best. But I love what you talked about there, Rob. Like there's also levity to it in almost all of these situations too.
The chocobo is called Bobby Corwin.
Bobby
Oh,
Corwin.
there
That's
you
such
go.
a freaking great
That's a
name.
great name.
I think that's like the loudest I laughed the whole time I was playing. So yeah, I mean, I think that that's just like you get to the outer continent and like it just hits you like a truck. And I think that it's really strong through the rest of the disc too. I mean, except for like we find out that we need to go to Madain Suri or however you say it, which is Summoner Village. On the way there, we have to go on this mountain path, and there's this boss that has the most obnoxious steel in the whole game. I never did get that damn fairy flute after 45 minutes of trying, and some like stone mini game that I didn't even bother with. But when we get to Minansuri, we meet. It's like basically a town full of Moogles, and then one very tiny, delightful child named Aiko, who is a summoner. We get a lot of backstory about Garnet here too. We find out a lot about who she was, how she came to find herself in Alexandria, or maybe that happens a little later. But whatever. And I think that Aiko was just a great character, and she manages to like have a crush on Zidane in a way that's like super delightful, and Zidane doesn't handle it for once in a super creepy way, which is awesome. And I just love the sequence too.
It's nice to know even he has a floor.
Yeah, I think I like this segment of the game as well. I feel like even like okay, I'm gonna keep bringing up Vivi, but yeah, even Vivi gets his own moment of like identity crisis here and sort of digesting what he saw at Black Mage Village and everything. And there's also the very cute moment when Kina kind of rejoins the party and helps cook with Aiko and everything. And yeah, no, there's a lot of really good stuff here. I think it's great. There's great character moments for like pretty much like everyone in the party at this point.
I also quite like with here that you like with the first time you visit, you don't really realize necessarily sort of many secrets and stuff are held there, because obviously you can go back later on and there's like a side quest you can do to reveal um, Garnet's real name. Just like the fact that you're there and there's so many other like mysteries and secrets that you don't know about initially when you get there that you can find out later. I think that's pretty cool.
I also love all the Moogles, of course.
I
They're
was
Yeah,
gonna
very
say
cute.
Moogles are the preponderance of Moogles in this game make me so happy.
yeah, and they're really cute Moogles too,
Yeah.
which is awesome. Yeah, and I like that. It's again we have like this place that is like sort of dealt with death, and what you sort of do with that and how you move past that, and it's just like such a again it's such a strong sequence throughout here. So yeah, I mean, I think from there, if I'm not mistaken, after that we realize that we have to go to the Ifa tree to go confront Kuja, which is sort of this place where souls are held, and we get to the end of Disc 2, where we have all these sort of like big summon fights, and Bronn is trying to do something. Bronn eventually dies. Kuja's involved. There's a ton going on here. I don't want to cover every single little bit and piece of this sequence, but I do want to talk about what you guys thought of the end of this too, or any moments that really stuck out to you.
A moment that always stands out to me about this is actually something I kind of um I guess understood or just kind of a plot point that hit me different like this playthrough compared to earlier ones of mine. But like Dagger's whole sort of process of like grieving for her mother, or for Braun, that whole process kind of hit differently for me this time. I feel like my first playthrough or like first couple of playthroughs, I was like, why is she like if Braun's such a like awful person or whatever, like why is she grieving for her? But I don't know, it hit me different this time. I could kind of see what she's saying in terms of like before all this, like yeah, Bron's been acting differently the past couple of months or however long the time period is, but before that she was still a very caring mother for her and like a good queen and all that. So I don't know, that plot point hit me differently this time around.
Yeah, I feel like that's something I picked up a lot more this time around too, is just the idea that the Braun that we see isn't the only Braun, essentially. That the queen was a completely different person before we saw her. And really starting to understand why that grief sets in. Why, I mean, I've been through it before. People can change for any number of reasons. Um and it's almost like losing a person because they become someone completely different. And I think now later in my life that's a lot more relatable and a lot more like impactful than it was as a kid, where I'd never really seen that happen before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting to think about, like, because like I think they actually go to get great pains. This is technically getting a little ahead of us, but whatever. Is of showing that Braun was still like beloved by the people of Alexandria, right? And how she was a person who really had a lot to do with the joys that happened in Alexandria, and also Garnet becoming sort of Garnet becoming the person who she was. And yeah, I think you're right. Like it's the idea of like so many of the people in this game make choices about who they're supposed to be, and for Braun, obviously she's manipulated into becoming what she does, and we see in the last moments on that beach when Garnet is talking to her that she regrets everything that's happened, and we don't know the full extent to which she has been controlled up to this point, but she had a role to play that sort of got switched. Everybody sort of makes their choices to some degree, and she at least regrets the choices insofar as she was able to make them at the end of her life, which I think is a really pretty impactful scene.
I don't particularly have anything else to add other than I think it's just a great moment that shows off, I suppose, not necessarily a side of Garnet that we haven't seen at all. I think we've had kind of hints of it, but it really is just a strong moment for like developing her character and showing you the depth of her feelings towards her mother, I suppose. Um, I just think it's a really beautifully done moment, but also I want to touch on how great some of the action is in the end of this disc, like with Leviathan. I just think it's really great. It's probably one of my favorite like cutscenes in the game. I think it's great.
Yeah. I wanted to also say, yeah, seeing all this sort of the might of these icons or eidolons, and that scene where like Kuja just flies away on his dragon with just like one little drop of blood or whatever. Like it's a very good establishing scene of like where sort of his power levels at, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kuja, and we'll talk more about Kuja obviously later, but I think Kuja is just like such a well-established villain, and he comes in just late enough that you can sort of see his power, and we see just enough of him sort of throughout. It's like one of those things that you really have to balance, and I think that like I don't know, I think about like I hate to bring up Final Fantasy VII here, but I'm going to. I think about Final Fantasy VII and the way they hold Sephiroth and they give you just enough of it, I think is good. And while I enjoy the remake trilogy, I think one of the things that I find frustrating about it is like I am really freaking tired of seeing Sephiroth in those two games, especially in the first one where we don't really know anything about him.
Mm.
And people argue with me all the time, like, "Oh, you can play it without any foreknowledge." And like, yes, you can, but like you're not going to understand what's going on with this in a way that really makes sense. And so I think that always that balancing act of what you do with the villain. I think about like Jaws, and how they hold Jaws back in those movies. And I think Kuja is just the right level of cool without going over the top into anime villain at this point. And I think that they have some missteps with villains later in the story, but I think Kuja is done just right.
Yeah, I feel like he gets underserved for what an amazing Final Fantasy villain he is. And I kind of hope that, if the rumored FF9 remake ever does coalesce, that Kuja gets kind of a reevaluation um, by kind of the general public, because I think he stands tall with some of the series' best for sure.
Yeah, I think especially some of the stuff around the ending, which we'll get to, really sells Kuja in an interesting way to me. and how Kuja really is just like all the rest of these people, and he just reacts differently to the same problems that all of us have to deal with at some point, right? So yeah, I think that this sequence is very strong. I think the action is great, and then I think that then it kind of takes us into disc three. And disc three, like I obviously haven't played this in a long time. Like I forgot like how long like you're sort of in towns, in cutscenes, in towns, in cutscenes at the beginning of disc three. Because to me, I was like, oh, when I get to disc three, I'm like going to get my ship and I'm going to go off and I'm going to explore. And then I was like 4 hours of being in Alexandria and sort of cutting between people in ways that I thought was often very impactful. I think that so Aiko wants to write a letter to Zidane, and then she gives it to one of the bandits. The bandit forgets to deliver it, and then like different people think they're giving the letters to each other, and then Steiner and Beatrix both think they're giving it to each other. And that's like a little moment of levity and all this sadness because Zidane is a very, very sad boy at this point. Garnet's going to become queen. There's just a lot going on here. I also love that it sort of mimics the beginning of Disc 1 too, where like you're playing as Vivi. There's also a terrible mini game, like that running mini game with the hippopotamus that I did not do all the way through to get the trophy for. But yeah, there's a lot going on here at the beginning of Disc 3.
Yeah, I actually didn't do it this time, but I have in previous playthroughs gone through like the entire that racing game or whatever. It's a journey.
I think I actually did the racing game this time. I'm trying to remember. This is giving me deja vu from the last one, but I definitely did do the running one for sure. I didn't do the skipping one, but I did do the running one. I didn't find that one too bad actually.
Yeah, it's not too bad. It just goes on for too long. It's just like the same thing over and over
that's
again. It's
true.
Yeah,
like
pretty much.
back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's like, okay, I get it. It was funny at first. I was like, okay, I got it. I'm moving on now. But yeah, I do think that we start to see like Zidane sort of struggling with the roles that other people are going to play and how he's not sure what he's going to do. And I think that Zidane isn't necessarily characterized a lot in the first two discs of this game, but I do think that he is a lot, especially on disc 3 in this game. And I think that his journey is really powerful and sets up the end of this disc, which I think is a very famous and very powerful moment as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna add sort of what you're saying in terms of like how this is a very like heavy moment, but there's still that levity mixed in. I really like Tantalus and like that cast of characters. So being able to like hang out with them again here is it does mimic the beginning of the game very well and does sort of put things in larger perspective of these events, like how are different people in this kingdom sort of reacting to the larger events of this game. And yeah, I think it's a great sort of let's like dial things back a bit, see how this affects our characters, and then before we move on to getting the ship and exploring the world and all that.
I do have to say though, I don't like that part of the beginning of this disc where you have to do the card game tournament in
Oh.
Trino.
That's terrible.
I just really don't like the card game in this game, and then having to like actually play it. At least you don't have to. I don't think you have to actually win though, do you? Do you?
You have to win the first two.
Okay.
You do not have to win the last one. The last one, if you win the last one, you get like a rebirth ring, I think, which at this point in the game is like an extremely good accessory. So like I was gonna get that. I was gonna get that rebirth ring. And I also love that the reason we go to the tournament is just because Zidane wants to. It's like he has to gamble his sorrows away. So he's just like, okay, I guess I'm gonna go over here and just play this card game. There's not any other real reason that he goes that I remember. And honestly, the best part of that sequence to me is like at some point, Vivi, you can send Vivi off, and Vivi goes to where he lived with his grandpa, and you go talk to Vivi about that. And that's sort of like a lovely little moment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, other than that, yeah, like Tetramaster is not good. And there's like it feels like there's like a degree of randomness to it. Like I understand it sort of theoretically, but not in practice at all.
I forgot. I'm surprised I didn't mention this last episode, but I'm actually a monster who likes Tetramaster more than Triple Triad. But I think it's because it was my first like FF and first like I think it's probably purely nostalgia, but I like fiended Tetramaster my first playthrough. Like I played against like everyone, got like almost all the cards and everything.
Wow.
But yeah, but I'm just like I think
Do you hate yourself?
It's just, I don't know. I think I like the RNG element to it. I think it's funny, but yeah, I know. I totally get it though. I feel like yeah, but yeah, I am just I don't know. It's just I really liked it, and then I went online and found out the world hates it.
Oh,
Well, we're all allowed to have bad takes. Some of us don't like Vivi.
That'll be
Some of
my
us don't like.
that's my
Some of us
VV
do
take.
like Tetramaster. Wes? What's your bad take?
Okay, I need to do a broader bad take to follow up this one, but I don't think either of the card games are good. So,
Oh my god, that's a loud one.
Queen's Blood tops both.
Oh, Queen's Blood is fire. Like I didn't really understand it when I was playing through it because I was playing it for review, and then Lana started playing it like as soon as I finished, and she was like just fiending over it, and I was like, oh, this is actually pretty fun. I wish I'd gotten into it, but I just picked it up for PC, so I will be getting into Queen's Blood. I never got into Tetramaster either. Like I'm just like not a big card game guy. Like I don't do it in 14.
Tetramaster is rough because they never really explain the rules well in game, and you have to kind of go do outside research to really grok what's going on. Like their description for the numbers is something like the numbers surely mean something, right? I don't know if there's anywhere in game where they actually explain it, but I never found it.
I don't think there is either. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think it kind of just throws you into it as they figure it out.
Well, because so we're getting way off here, but whatever. So like if you're in a battle between two cards and one number is like let's say like 80 and the other one's like 20, how does the 20 win sometimes? It's just like pure RNG.
I guess so. I actually don't even know those specifics myself. I think it's like a weighted sort of RNG is my guess, but I'm not 100% either.
Oh man,
I think it's a weighted RNG is my guess.
Okay, some listener, please send us an email or hit us on Discord and let us know why we're all bad at Tetramaster, except for Mario, apparently, who is a monster who enjoys this terrible game.
I'm just built different. What can I say?
The problem is none of them are Xenocard, the game from Xenosaga Episode 1, the game everyone ignored but was secretly the best minigame in any game ever. And since nobody paid attention to it, Final Fantasy never copied it.
I forgot that thing even existed, so I played it pretty recently. I need to play Xenosaga 2. Okay.
Or you can read a synopsis and play the good one.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, speaking of good ones, I think one of the best moments in Final Fantasy IX happens right after Trino, when you get back to Alexandria. There's so many cool moments when you get back there. Alexandria is being invaded by Kuja. He's trying to take it out, and you get all these really cool sequences. I really like the sequence with Steiner and Beatrix together as they're fighting. And I always thought that Beatrix feels a little underpowered in battle on my end. I'm like, if I can never beat her, then you should make her level 99, not level 17 and does slightly less damage than Steiner. Come on, she's just supposed to be holding back. But the moment where you go up top and Aiko and Garnet managed to summon Alexander together, which I always wanted them to do a little bit more with Alexander. I thought they would do more with Alexander throughout the rest of the game. But still, that doesn't take away from the epicness of that cutscene and just how beautiful all the FMV stuff there is.
Yeah, I love this segment of the game. With Steiner and Beatrix as well, I feel like it's very. I like that they have their moment. It's very cute. But yeah, no, it's definitely. It's also good in terms of gameplay wise for me. At this point, Steiner's so under leveled from everyone else that it kind of catches him up, which is good.
Yeah. Got 7 levels out of these fights.
Yeah, it's so much XP. It's much needed for him. So I appreciate that. If only Beatrix could stick around too, but that's a whole other story.
I always find as well with Steiner, I think this is the point where you've not really used him much for quite a long time, but I always end up with 4 swords for him that I haven't actually been able to equip. So he's got loads of abilities to learn. So I have to spend ages using some rubbish sword that
Coral
I got hours ago that is really weak, just so that he can learn his abilities. I always find that a bit irritating. But having Beatrix for that short time is wonderful.
Yeah, I mean Beatrix is my favorite character in the game. I mean, I don't think that's a hot take at all. I never shared my hot take. I don't know if I have one. I'll think about it. But I think that this sequence is just great. And like I said, I especially like the Garnet and Aiko stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, getting the chance to spend some time with Beatrix is great because she's she's the cool character that you don't get in your party. For the most part,
Yeah, like the Leo of this
she's the
game.
Leo. She's the yeah. Take your pick, Aranea, whoever you want throughout Final Fantasy, and just being able to like have her in your party briefly and get to know her a little bit better and get to understand her. Like, yeah, she seems competent, but you also get a feeling for like where that drive comes from, where it's not just like cold as ice. It's very driven and it's coming from a place of compassion and duty and like I don't know, she just becomes a more rounded character during this section and makes you even sadder that you can't have her in your party.
Yeah. And I think the fallout from this is pretty intense too, and I think it's powerful what they do with Garnet after this too. And again, like you have this, I think she has these notions of like she needed to protect Alexandria. She couldn't be the queen that she was supposed to be. She loses her voice for a long time, which makes her totally rubbish in battle. Just like not even worth having in your party, except for that you have to have her in your party for part of the sequence when she has no voice. Hopefully she's in your more powerful party. But I think that, again, I think the fallout from this is really interesting. And I also love that when we go back, so we go to Lindblom to like, okay, we got to kind of regroup, figure out where we're going to go from here. What are we going to do about this? We got to go after Kuja. And then Sid's like, well, you gotta cure me first. I mean, like I'm a, an oglop. So please cure me. So you go, and for some reason, 3 random people around town have these potions, and Dr. Top brews them up, and then he just turns into a frog. And it's like, all the stuff was, I just wish to say to stayed a frog the whole game. It would have been way funnier,
Agreed.
personally.
Yeah. I kind of love this comedy of errors with with him, being turned into all these different creatures and the tribulations this poor guy goes through and um especially how once he turns human he doesn't look significantly less goofy than he did in any of his animal forms.
Ribbit.
But you kind of get to know him as this like grandstanding insect and frog and you never really lose that impression of him even after he's no longer one.
Oh,
Yeah, I
that's
mean, like there are a
hilarious.
lot of great Sids in Final Fantasy, obviously, and I'll be honest, I think that he's just recently been surpassed as the greatest Sid, but like he's like a top 3 Sid for me. But I mean,
Yeah, he's top tier Sid.
the 16
Yeah.
Sid is, for whatever you think of that game, he's amazing.
I did wonder though, if those potions are like right there in the city, why did he not get them
Right.
before?
Why did he wait till
It's never
now?
really
Yeah.
occurred to me until I played through it this time, but I was like, if you literally thought they were gonna make you better, why have you waited all this time?
Couldn't find a good personal shopper. Sometimes it's like that.
Yeah. One cute moment from here that I like too is when you are looking for those potions randomly, you run into that family from Burmecia, who like or now they're like have kids and everything. It's a very cute moment. I forgot which district it's in, but um yeah, you get like when you got to see them earlier in the game when they were escaping Burmecia and all that. So it's a very cute sort of round circle moment too. Um but yeah, just a nice touch.
Yeah, I think in general this game does a nice job of like sort of planting seeds of like little like people here and there who come back who seem like, they're like sort of like entertaining NPCs or interesting NPCs. And then like you see them again. Like I think about Puck, who just like sort of
Yeah.
reappears like multiple times over the course of I don't know the first 3 discs of this game, and that's never really resolved. But like Puck is just like this like kid who's just off doing his own thing, and he's like Vivi's only friend, and I like the way they managed to do that throughout the game. But yeah, I mean, like after this happens, we actually end up finally after like these 4 or 5 hours of just like consistent stuff in cities, in towns, except for I did do the book fight at this point, and even at the book fight, which you have to do before Alexandria is destroyed, is still annoying even at
Mhm.
a higher level,
Yep.
because it just takes so long. And I was like, I know that I am overpowered for this fight, and it's still taking forever. But yeah, after that though, you get the boat, and then the world opens up. And by world opens up, that means that like I get to do most of my Chocobo hot and cold stuff, which is really what I cared about, because you
The most
become like
important part of the game.
so overpowered at this point in the game. Like you can get like I think Ragnarok right around now, which is technically not Steiner's ultimate sword, but it almost is. and you just absolutely obliterate everything in your path. And that was sort of my experience for the rest of the game at this point. But I do like that the world doesn't feel super overwhelming at this point. I think they do a nice job of like just giving you like, hey, here's this continent, here's this continent. You're supposed to go to this continent again because you're supposed to go back to the Black Mage Village because people saw Kuja with those Black Mages, but you still have other places you can go. The only thing that's annoying is getting to that second Chocobo hot and cold spot at this point, which is like I had to look up a guide to figure out how to even get to it because it's so particular about like how you have to do it with your Chocobo.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So did you guys do all the Chocobo hot and cold at this point too?
As much as I could, yeah.
Yeah, I think I might have even done quite a lot of it. I basically do it as soon as I possibly can. So
Yeah,
I
same.
usually start it when you first leave Lindblum and you're going to like, is it Geysermaluke's Grotto, I think? Because you can go to the first Chocobo Forest at that point and get a couple. But I generally kind of try and spread it out over the next sort of few sections because this kind of part that we're coming up to now is probably my least favorite part of the game because it just feels like kind of one castle dungeon after another. So I try and like break those up a little bit with some other side activities like the Chocobo game.
Yeah, for me, I definitely, yeah, I usually do the, um, yeah, sides quest stuff pretty much as soon as I can, so I can get like good equipment out of it. That's Chocobo, and the frog swamps too. I always go for those.
Gotta get them Kina buffs.
Yeah, the frog thing, I couldn't remember like where I had gone. Like I feel like I needed to like literally like have a timer for like I went to this one first, and then I went to that one, and then I went to the other one. And at the end, I actually think that to me the hardest boss in the game is the one at the end of the frog quest because it throws you right into it. Like I had no idea it was coming, and I was like, wait a second, and they were just like tossing status effects on me. I wasn't ready for it, and I had saved for a while. I was like, oh shoot, I'm
Oh
gonna
no.
die. And it's just like this chef who was just bodying me. It was like okay, but yeah, I mean, I think that again, we talked about how the side quests in this game are not like oppressively long or difficult or challenging, and that was honestly the most that was to me the super boss of the game was at the end of the frog catching mini game.
I mean, I guess if you were super like diligent about catching frogs, you could potentially fight Quail before, like way before you're ready to, and then you'd be really stuck. You'd have to, yeah. He's
Yeah,
tough, yeah.
I actually still I did it in disc 4, so it wasn't like super early or anything. Because I wasn't super diligent about the frog thing, and I didn't realize that like you were supposed to leave like a male and a female so they could repopulate it a little bit faster or whatever. So like I got it pretty late, and still I thought it was one of the hardest fights in the game. I think my Kina was underpowered though, so that was part of it because I am not a blue mage person. I hate. Especially in this game, I think the like getting the blue magic, especially like if it's like an early game enemy, is extremely annoying
Mm-hmm.
to like you have to
Yeah.
get it down to like 25% health and like I have to like take Aiko and put the weakest weapon on her and then attack and hope that she doesn't kill it.
Yeah, the blue mage in this game's pretty rough.
I think for the most part, I was pretty good at managing to get most of the skills as they were coming up, but there were definitely a couple I missed. And then I had to do the same thing where I was equipping Vivi with some terrible staff to try and try and get the HP down enough to not kill everything. Yeah.
I mean, it's annoying too because Kina's pretty powerful if you build them right. Like Angel Snack and some of those late bosses would be like a godsend. The
Yeah,
ability
I
to
mean,
clear status effects for everybody. Who, auto life, which I know that Amaranth gets too, but still, we haven't even really talked about Amaranth. Yeah, we pick up Amaranth. I totally forgot to talk about Amaranth, the most hated character in Final Fantasy IX. Okay, here's my hot take. I
They
like
hate him because
Amaranth.
they ain't him.
I like Amaranth. He's like so goofy and ridiculous in the way that he's presented. His character design doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not really even sure what's happening. It's like a helmet hair thing. It's like Darth Vader mixed with bad 80s hair. I don't get it at all. But it's like so metal. I just love it. And super useful in battle. I look around the internet and everyone's like, I hate Amaranth. I'm like, you're grumpy. Get on my side. Get on my level. I love Amaranth. Any other Amaranth lovers here?
I like
Um,
him. He was in my final party, which we'll probably talk about in a bit. Which was the first time I'd really sort of decided I was going to go ahead and use him sort of properly. And he is pretty great. I think my dislike for him comes from the fact that he just doesn't feel like he has very much relevance. Like, I don't really understand why he's there.
Because he wants to fight Zidane, and
That
then
ju-
he
that
doesn't want to.
that just doesn't feel like enough. Like, I need more. I need more. I need more.
It's a
than
very
that.
classic anime trope of the I'm a rival. I'm just here to fight you. Oh, whoops, became your friend. I'll die for you now.
That
I
always happens.
I love Amaran uh purely through nostalgia. He was my favorite character the first time I played this as a younger person. Um he lived in my party, did not leave. I think his hair is like dreads by way of someone who has never seen dreadlocks in their life. Um and like so many people I knew thought he was some kind of rooster person because between the red and the fact that his like chin slash beard is so pointy, everyone just thought that was a beak sticking out of a big red rooster frill. It's weird because he and Freya both have non-traditional character designs, but both are arguably situated as like the super cool character, the Kane, the Vincent, what have you. With the traditional dragoon job always being kind of the cool thing, and Amarant obviously being like a FF9 sense of styles interpretation of cool. Um, so there's a lot of like nostalgic love for Amarant, and yeah, this time around I did kind of see that trope playing in a little bit more, and I don't know, it's another one of those things that as I get older and I see that more, I kind of understand what they're playing with, and I enjoy it a little bit more too.
Yeah, I like Emrat. I think it's a very stacked party, so he kind of just falls to the wayside for me in terms of like how I regard, I guess, everyone. But I like him. He's cool. He's chill. Yeah, just kind of inoffensive to me is kind of where I place him. Like,
It's
yeah, you go ahead. You can join us on our adventure. Sure, why not? We have room.
it's very much like a party of really strong characters, and
Hmm.
he's not always quite as strong, although he has a toolkit to play with. So I think he often gets kind of sidelined because it's like, well, why aren't you bringing like Steiner or a fully buffed Freya or someone like that for your physical damage dealer? But um, it's not a game that requires an ideal party
No.
for like any of its challenges.
Yeah, that's true for even Ozma. I mean, like, but like the utility of No Mercy, which was hitting like 7 8K for me with Aura, with Chakra to restore MP if the battle ever lasted that long, which it didn't, except for the book fight. That was it. That was the longest fight in the game for me. Just very valuable in battle, and especially since I did not want to mess around with all the blue magic for Kina. Ended up being just a total mainstay of my party. Yeah, I mean, like, and you actually have to use them in your party pretty soon here because after you go to the Black Mage Village, and we've already kind of talked about that sequence, you then fly off to the Forgotten Continent. I'm not really sure why the continent is forgotten as opposed to the Outer Continent. Is it because like no one really lives there? I don't really understand why it's called the Forgotten Continent.
I
Anybody have
didn't
any
fully
ideas on that?
grok that.
I was like, I never really thought about it before. And then we get to what I think what I'm gathering from what I've heard from people on the podcast so far, what is their least favorite sequence of this game, because we're going after Kuja. We have to like hop into like one of four like sand, quicksand things, and I ended up not knowing which one it was, so I fought like an antlion 7 times because I didn't really understand what I was doing,
Oh
which really
no.
sucked. It was actually pretty hard. Also a pretty hard fight, which is nice. But then a lot of stuff happens. Like we end up having like the party split. We get captured by Kuja. Kuja like says like go off and get this thing that I want. I can't even remember what he's having you grab. And then like your other party starts playing around, and you have all these puzzles in these different dungeons, and it's just like it's a little bit of a slog, and mostly the puzzly nature of them sort of made it a slog for me because like, I felt like I was just like running back and forth constantly. But I know I'm not the only person who didn't really like the sequence.
Yeah, I think for me, up until you get to Terra, this part of the game is definitely a bit rough. Probably my least favorite part as well. It's not as bad like doing it like knowing the party split and all that. My first playthrough was rough though. I like completely ignored like 4 party members, and they happen to be the 4 party members they put in Kuja's palace. So that was rough. Like, I really had to improvise, and yeah, it just that boss fight at the end there was really rough. And yeah, I didn't realize, like, Kuja says, like, when you choose your party split, he mentions like, oh, this place has an anti magic sort of barrier or whatever, but I didn't really realize what that meant until I got there. Like, oh, he really meant that. So yeah, but it's better. It's easier on second playthroughs or further on because I know where it's coming and I know like the ideal party split. But yeah, it's rough first time experience.
This is where a lot of my replays fall off. I'm not gonna lie, because I just don't want to deal with it. Not this time. Not the last one I did, but
Sorry, I was just going to say I'm the same. Like, I think this is the first time in a really long time that I've played through the whole of this section and then carried on to the end of the game. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan. It's fine, but I do try and like when there are breaks between what's going on, I try and like do something else for a bit. So do a bit of chocobo minigame or just to break things up a bit of level grinding, whatever. I think at this point, Dagger still cannot speak.
Correct.
Yeah,
which is part of the problem. Yeah.
So usually, like that would bother me, but I think I'd already decided at this point that I was not going to use her as much as I usually do. I wanted to focus more on using Ico. So it didn't bother me so much this time, but usually that is also an annoyance for sure.
I think that the third disc in general, until the end, sort of has like weird pacing issues. Like I feel like it's like you got like 4 or 5 hours of no dungeons, nothing, and then you get like 4 or 5 hours of all dungeon, and oftentimes annoying dungeon. Like I don't think Mount Golg is too bad, where because Ico at the end of this sequence gets kidnapped. Like you're all sort of running into a room because Kuja tries to trick you into like bringing the because he thinks that your party is still captive when they're not, and then Ico just gets in there at the last second, and then he takes her to Mount Golg to pull her eidolons out. Um, and I think that Mount Golg is okay, and especially the end of Mount Golg when you run into Hilda, and then you see the conversation between Hilda and Sid, which outside of the fact that it cures Sid, which I am not a fan of because I like my froggy Sid. Outside of that, like the Hilda Sid thing, I think is pretty entertaining. She's way nicer to him than she probably should be, given how much of a piece of crap it seems like he is.
Mhm.
But other than that, I think it's fun.
Yeah, for whatever reason, it just never really bothered me. Like, and this is another one of those things that maybe we haven't talked about so much. How Final Fantasy IX is such a love letter to the series and everything that came before. There are all these little um references to other locations in the series. Mount Gulg obviously being one of them. The location back in Final Fantasy 1 that kind of sort of returns, and I mean, there are dozens of those throughout the game, some of which
I think
we'll
the
almost
music
have
is
to
even
touch
like
on.
the same,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, it was doing it before FF14 was doing it.
There's also a Mount Gulg in 14. Yeah.
There is.
Yep.
That's a good point actually, because when I first played Final Fantasy IX when it came out, I hadn't played any game in the series earlier than 7, but playing it through this time, I have now played. So last year I started playing through all the Pixel remasters, and it's the first time I played 1, 2, and 3. I'm on 4 at the moment, but even just seeing now that I've played those first 3 games, there are so many references to them in 9 that I went totally over my head the first time I played this. And it's really great. I love seeing it. It's, I guess, like kind of playing them backwards is an interesting way of doing it. But yeah, it's really cool, like how much it draws on various different story elements from especially 1 and 3 for sure. I think they were the ones where I noticed the most. But even down to like the dwarves in that village that say Rally Ho, that came initially from Final Fantasy 3. And yeah, it's really cool to see. I'm glad I'm kind of experiencing it again now after having played more of the early games in the series.
Yeah, that was pretty much my experience as well. Because having 9 be my first Final Fantasy, it pretty much like of course all went over my head, but playing through it now after having played a lot of the earlier titles, yeah, it's really cool to see all those references.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, I obviously played most of the Final Fantasies that have been localized. I think I played all of them that have been localized to the West when 9 came out. But now I've played 5 since, I've played 3 since, and those 2 in particular, I think are very influential here. I think in
Mm.
particular, like the stuff with Zandy at the end is very reminiscent, and Cloud of Darkness is very reminiscent of the very end here. Zandy himself, very reminiscent, not wanting to die, same way that Kuja does. I think we're getting a little ahead here, but it's just it's very like it's like sort of this culmination of like Sakaguchi's like, oh, I like kind of like that, and Kuja and Zidane's relationship reminds me a lot of Cecil and Golbez's relationship, and even like sort of them being from another planet. There's so many little tiny things put in here, but it is interesting for me to know that like this game totally stood on its own for people who hadn't played these games before the way that Wes and I had.
It's kind of cool that it's a love letter, but it's not just for longtime fans. The true Final Fantasy for fans and first timers.
It's interesting too because I don't think you really would lose a ton without those references, and as
Yeah.
sort of evidenced by what Rob and Mario are saying. But I think like something like Final Fantasy 14, which very much is, I mean, like way more than Final Fantasy 9 is. It is a game built on what's come before in terms of storytelling in particular, and I think that you would actually lose something not getting some of those references in 14. I mean, like Dawn Trail has so many Final Fantasy 9 references. And as a person who didn't remember 9 very well, I was like, "Ooh, yeah," because literally, like the final dungeon in this is not a big spoiler, is Alexandria in 14. Sorry, it's really not a spoiler; it doesn't tell you anything, but it's just really interesting to me.
Yeah, it's kind of the difference between the references being the point and the references being the jumping off point. Where
Mm.
like in here they use those as nods rather than as, well, if you understand those games, this enriches the story. Um which FF14 does a mixed job of. And a lot of times the excitement in FF14 is just, oh my god, I'm fighting this boss from an earlier series. I wonder how they'll interpret him. Whereas in this, it's just like, oh, that's cool. I remember that, but it's going to do its own thing with it.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's very
like
true.
the patch cycle for Endwalker is like it's basically just like Final Fantasy IV. Like you literally fight the four fiends from that.
Yep.
Golbez is a major villain, and it's not very good to be honest with you, that patch cycle. But like it's again like my excitement for it is like I am a Final Fantasy IV lover. So like you give me the Tower of Zod, I'm like yes, and I think you would definitely lose something without it. Whereas here, that's not a thing.
Mm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Knock on wood, but I'm very glad they have not put Oivert into 14 or made it a dungeon or anything. If
Oh,
that
there's some
happens,
annoying
that
dungeons in 14 though.
yeah, we're not out of the patch series yet, so it might still happen. But
You never know. But yeah, I mean, I think that you also get like after you do this, I think this is the point at which Hilda tells us a lot about what Kuja's plan is. The plan is to sort of open up this space between Gaia, which is the planet we're on now, and Terra. Or she talks about it in general. I don't remember exactly how much of his plan she tells us, but we then know that we need to get to this other place, and we first have to go to what I think is another annoying dungeon, which is Ipsen Castle. It's not too bad. The gimmick here is that like it's upside down, which means that like your weapons, you need to use like your weakest weapon, and they give you like treasure chests of all the weakest weapons, or like the second weakest weapon as you're walking through it. And Amaranth here is like, Zidane, you're dumb. You always want to fight on a team. Let me show you how it's done. I'm going to do it by myself because I'm awesome. And then, like, of course, he screws up and you have to go save him. And he's like, I will follow you everywhere. It's so ridiculous that I love it.
Well, clearly I
that
was
sums up his
wrong.
arc. Yeah,
But yeah, Ipsy Castle's fine. It's just my wife told me the gimmick, and I was like, oh, okay. Then it was fine. But if I didn't know it, I think I would have been extremely frustrated by it. That probably wasn't my first playthrough.
That's maybe one of the only gripes that I would have about FF9 is just there are a lot of gimmick dungeons that are kind
Mm.
of old school. There are a lot of those in like the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Final Fantasy era. Um, but
I
they
mean, the
don't
gimmick
always feel
dungeon in
fun.
4 is the worst one, like, the one where you're
Your metal,
magnetized. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the worst part of that game. That's where I fall off of playthroughs of that game.
Yeah, that's the problem, is, like, I understand the purpose of gimmick dungeons, but also they're not that doesn't usually translate to fun for me, so these are just things I have to get through.
Yeah, it also just at this point in the game, it just feels really random for me to have Amaranth have this whole moment. It's just like, yo, we're heading to the end of the game. Like at this point, we gotta obby a team. You know, we have already traveled together so much. It's just really random. Or yeah,
Yeah, where did this doubt come in?
yeah. It's like if this was like his moment before he like joins the party, or like kind of earlier on in the game when we first meet him, I kind of see that character beat happening then. But I don't know. For me, it just feels kind of out of place here. But you know, but I mean, I don't mind it. It's not too intrusive.
I mean, I still think it's a little bit better than the way they handle Freya. Like Freya's story is so front loaded, and then like
Yeah.
Freya just becomes like sort of a non-entity
Which is a
for like
real
most of the game
shame.
after that. Yeah, because Freya is so great. So yeah, I think that sometimes they struggle with. Again, this game is very good, but there is some weaknesses here, and I think that it struggles sometimes to balance the like where they're putting things, and sometimes
Mm.
it feels like they dump things in certain spots, and they don't dump things, and then like it just sort of like ebbs and flows in some odd ways, I think.
Yeah, it feels like maybe they kind of had. I'm just thinking about kind of Freya and Amaranth a bit now. Like they had maybe an idea for the story that they wanted, and the kind of main characters that they could fit into that story, but that wasn't quite enough to fill out a full like party of characters, so they had to kind of try and find ways to like fit in a couple of others. And it's a shame really, especially with Freya, because the section of her kind of story in the first couple of discs is so good. um but yeah, it's a bit odd. It's a bit odd.
Luckily, though, we are about to enter what, in my opinion, is the best sequence in this game,
Yeah.
by a pretty wide margin, in my opinion. I mean, there are lots. I think the end of Disc 2 is great. There's so many good things in this game, but the end of Disc 3 is excellent.
Like
I'm a sucker.
legendary
I'm
levels.
a sucker for the end in particular, which we'll talk about. So, we end up finding out how to break the seal. We have to like break off, and like we have to do like a boss fight with just two people at some point. But that section's quick, and then you go to the Shimmering Island, and then you make your way to Terra, which turns out is another planet that is sort of trying to absorb the life force from Gaia. So you get some life stream type stuff here too, with the mist and all that jazz. And it turns out that Zidane was actually like sort of a puppet that was created by this guy named Garland, who also, I think they imply later, was also a puppet that was created by Terra to basically restore Terra. I'm a little unclear on that, so please correct me if I'm wrong, experts here. But and that Zidane was like sort of the ultimate puppet to help it along. He was sort of a better version of Kuja, so we find out that Kuja and Zidane are kind of like brothers here, or both being manipulated. And you meet all these other dolls. Garland, of course, is sort of the big bad ish. And Terra's just beautiful. And obviously Zidane, when he's told this, he struggles with this information quite a bit. So before we talk about You Are Not Alone, what are some other impressions that you guys had of Terra? Did it, because for me, I was like, "Ooh, this is like Final Fantasy IV. It's like Lunarians. It's so cool." But like, what were some other impressions that you guys had of Terra and other things you liked about it?
The idea of interrupting the cycling of souls was really fascinating to me. The idea of this almost slow takeover, like this taking a home for yourself by just every time one of them dies, they're taken out of the pool and one of yours is added in. Like, um, it's a really interesting take on like a JRPG villainous plot for a reincarnation mythos. Um, and and I think it's really fascinating to see, kind of a dead dying planet as part of this as well. The fact that the apocalypse has already happened over there, and it makes it into one of my favorite types of villainous stories, where part of you can almost understand like being driven to the extremes, in order to try to give a future to the entire world you've ever known. Um, regardless of whether or not the methods used were acceptable, that's still kind of a fascinating drive for a potential villain.
Yeah, I think I quite like this section as well because I don't know. I feel like the game kind of up to this point had really stuck quite strongly to its very sort of traditional fantasy aesthetic, and then getting to this point, it's almost kind of bringing in elements of science fiction now, which I really appreciated. It feels like such a kind of change in environment. I remember the first time I played it being quite surprised because I remember like hearing so much about how this was a kind of return to a more traditional fantasy setting, and I was obviously coming into this only really knowing the more sort of sci-fi slanted Final Fantasy games before it. So I certainly appreciated this quite. To me, anyway, it feels quite a kind of drastic change in aesthetic and environment, and it really does give such a good like contrast to Gaia and everything that the characters are obviously very used to. Um, yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, no, I love this section of the game. I love sort of what you're saying with seeing this sort of tonal or not tonal, I guess like aesthetic mixture, tonal as well, but yeah, yeah, I love seeing like medieval fantasy characters in like a sci-fi setting. Like I think that's just really cool. So that's something I really like about this section as well. Terra itself is beautiful. It does a lot for Zidane's character. I like that there's a random Moogle here still. Like, it's just like,
Yeah,
what has that
how
Moogle
did the
done to
Moogle
get
make
here?
its way to Terra?
Yeah, like I'm
Because they
glad we could
can't make their
save
way to
here.
Memoria, but they can make their way to Terra. Please explain that to me.
Yeah, no, that also, yeah, I'm like, I'm very surprised they didn't put a Moogle in Memorial. Because at that point they'd already been everywhere, so it's just why not have them be there too? But I digress. But yeah, no, I love this section of the game. Yeah, what it does for character and sort of seeing well, we'll talk about pandemonium and all that stuff as well. But yeah, it's just really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we at this point understand Kuja's motivations at least to some degree, where like his soul is going to be taken by Garland once it's done, and so like he refuses to. He's sort of raging against the dying of the light in his own way, the same way that the people of Terra are, the same way that Zidane eventually does, the same way Vivi has, the same way Garnet has. I mean, like I think that this game is so thematically consistent and rich that like Terra could feel like it just sort of comes out of nowhere, right? Like, and that's what Final Fantasy does. And I think there is something that comes out of nowhere that we'll talk about that I understand, but I have some problems with. But it feels so often plot twists go against the thematic concerns of the game, I think, or they feel like shoehorned in to get to the thematic concerns of something. But here again, like I think that just like I think, when we are all living a life, right? We're all sort of figuring out like what to do with our time, how to, extend it, how to do things with it. And it's a common trope, but it is one that I think is crystallized so well in this sequence that I think it's what really elevates this game to, sort of that higher tier Final Fantasy for all its other, weaknesses. But it has a lot of strengths as well. So like I think that it's so good. And the setting is so good and it's so just aesthetically rich. I just love it. And I think that, to kind of, talk about that sequence, right? So, Zidane is giving up and he's basically walk out of, and I'm trying to remember what he's walking out of or even why he is, but he's sort of given up. He thinks that all this must be meaningless. I had a purpose and I was made for this purpose, so I can't be your friends. I was made to destroy you. I can't be with you. And then all these people coming along, and like there's like that black background with the characters there, and then he gets into a fight, and then someone joins him when he's struggling a little bit, and they deal with it like they deal with like narrative in a gameplay way here too, like the fact that these fights are kind of hard when you're just Zidane and walking away, and then when someone joins you, it gets easier. And in a game that's not very challenging in general, I think that is a really nice touch to like sort of enriching the narrative through the gameplay, which is a thing that I am a total sucker for. And it
Yeah,
is
same.
also like my favorite type of story beat. They totally take this and use it in Endwalker. If you've ever played the end of Endwalker, in a way that I think is maybe even more moving than this. But it's used everywhere. Like Xenoblade 3 does it. It's power of friendship, but power of friendship done right and done to fight something that is really tough. When we talk about like narratives that are dark, 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 and then there's hope in that darkness, this is it. This is so freaking good.
Also accompanied by my favorite song in all of Final Fantasy history. So let's not let's not forget this part of the equation.
Yeah, no, the song's so good.
I always love it when games, especially, but like any kind of media, I guess. But I always love it when games kind of try to, I guess, tackle any kind of like mental health stuff, which I think, although very simplified here, has such a strong message um, to see when you're playing it. Like Zidane's gone through this like life changing thing. He kind of doesn't really know what to do with himself. He wants to just cut off the relationships that he's built with all of these other characters. And I think it does such a wonderful job of like showing the importance of showing up and being there as a support for someone that's going through something really difficult. So yeah, I always really enjoy this section for that as well. I think it's really good.
Yeah, I really like that aspect of it as well. I also wanted to add that it's also like because up to the or at least like the beginning section of the game, like Zidane's characterized as like really carefree, really sort of that sort of character. So seeing him go through something like this really does send that message of like one, it adds like a lot of depth to his character, but two, it also yeah shows that like everyone can feel these struggles and all these things. And yeah, it's just yeah, I think it's a really great moment.
I kind of want to double up on Zach's point about gameplay reinforcing the narrative. I'm such a sucker for that. Anything where you can use the gameplay of your game to reinforce something, whether it's like the original Mario Bros teaching you how to play the game through level design, or this like driving its themes through like how the battles are working. I am always so impressed by that, and not only that, it justifies the existence of this story as a video game in some ways. It it is telling a
Yeah.
story in a way that cannot be told through other medium. It's not just gameplay separated by cutscenes. It's
Hmm.
gameplay helping to tell the story.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it's not nearly common enough either. It is an extreme frustration of mine that I think that is not something that games do enough. And the reason is because like you think about like the AAA space nowadays, that's what people want. They want big long cutscenes with cool fights in between and blah 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 blah. But like this does it so well in a simple way. Like it's not anything like that's challenging to do, but like obviously, here's Zach Wilkerson talking about Nier Automata again. Obviously, I think that game does that to a degree. Like it takes it to 11, and we've had 8 years now since that game has come out, and nothing else is working on that level in my opinion. But here we have back in 2000 a game that really understood how to do that in a way. And I think sometimes gimmick dungeons are a way of trying to do it, but it doesn't really work. But here, oh my goodness, it works.
Yeah, it's a fantastic merging of gameplay and story. And I guess just fun antidote, I guess. My first playthrough of this, it went well, it was great. Second playthrough of this, I didn't realize you could die during the sequence, which is very anticlimactic.
Oh
But
man, yeah.
yeah, it could happen. um,
I mean, I
yes,
can imagine if you just get hit too hard with Zidane early, like before someone shows up, it makes sense.
yeah, it's just a very funny. This is a funny sequence to die in, but
And here's my other hot take: I think this is where the game should have ended. Uh, I think it's
Oh,
100% where the
there's
game
the
should have
hottest
ended.
take.
That is a
Ooh.
hot take. Yeah,
I
that
mean,
is.
Memoria is a cool dungeon. I like the thematic ideas about memory and stuff like that, and it's all very good. But like, it feels like this is like the crescendo, and then like Memoria, while good, is just like let's just like sort of resolve it. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that you could have done the whole ending and everything else basically in a very similar way by just making Transkuja here the final boss. Get rid of Necron. What the hell's up with Hades? They could just end it here, and like I think that you put some of that post game stuff and make it accessible earlier. I think it's better.
I don't necessarily disagree with that actually. It makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there because I mean Necron is a big pain point for a lot of people with this game, honestly.
Yeah, I don't mind Necron. I like sort of the symbolic aspect of it, but it is like a lot. I agree. It is like I see people's points about, um, yeah, Necron really does come out of nowhere. Like there's just no no getting around that. So yeah, I feel you.
I mean, I think that you could have, even if you wanted to continue to have Necron and have that very, like literal interpretation of death and fate and all that stuff in here. You still could have popped it here if you
That's
really
true.
wanted
Yeah.
to. So yeah, we'll talk about Memoria, but I think that it's just this is so emotionally powerful that I think everything else just sort of struggles to live up to it and live in its shadow. Even though the ending, I think itself is very good. But yeah, I mean, I think that like that's basically like we are basically now at the final dungeon though. Like disc 4, is not. I'm not even really sure why it needed to be its own disc, because like most of the things that are accessible in disc 4 were also accessible in disc 3. So I don't know, but um, you get access to in disc 4 you realize that Kuja's realized how to trance in this really powerful way, and you save all the Terrians as Terra is collapsing, and like sort of one of the main dolls, I can't remember her name, tells you that you have like a no shot at all of beating Kuja, which is funny because you absolutely wipe the floor with him. But um, as you come out of there, and then you have some side quests to do, and there are a couple of side quests you couldn't have completed before disc 4, but not many. um like I don't know, like you can get like all the coins there, you can get Excalibur here. You could have fought Ozma in disc 3. I would not recommend that. But yeah, there's not a lot to disc 4 outside of the final dungeon. Did anybody do like a lot of side activities on disc 4 before they went to the final dungeon?
No, I think I'd done most of the ones I was going to do already. And I ran out of time for some stuff as well because I
Yeah, I
wanted
had to
to
finish
I
the
wanted to get
game.
through. Yeah, yeah.
I totally feel you. I mean, like I didn't quite 100% it. Like I don't know, there's some like Moogle thing where like you have to go to all the beaches. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I don't, because the reward was you could heal on the overworld. I'm like, I'm not even going to be on the overworld. Why do I care? um, but yeah, I did do Ozma, which I'll talk about briefly here, which is like this super weird super boss. It doesn't like there's no context for it. Like we have no idea what this big giant ball of I don't know black and white stuff is. Um, and there is a way that you can make it a little bit easier, which I did do, where you there's like a friendly monsters quest where you have to feed them things, and it allows you to hit Ozma physically. It also makes it so Ozma takes damage from shadow attacks. So it makes a big difference. But for a super boss in a Final Fantasy game, or at least a PS1 Final Fantasy game, to say nothing of the super bosses in Final Fantasy X, because like what, like penance? How? Um, but anyway, it's sort of an interesting fight. But I do think that it gets to some of the problems that Final Fantasy IX has in its combat. Where like the first time I fought Ozma, it was like I got hit by these status effects, so I was like, okay, I will protect against those status effects. And then the second time I fought Ozma, Ozma fired off an attack that is totally RNG. It's called Meteor. Basically, it can hit every party member for 9,999 damage. It did. It wiped me. And then the last time I went into it, I just got lucky with the turn order and I killed it in like 3 minutes. Because like the HP values are so low that I think they
Mm.
had to introduce RNG into that fight to make it more challenging in a way. But it's still, I think, kind of better than the weapon fights in Final Fantasy VII, where like basically it's like, do you have Knights of the Round, and do you have the ability to copy Knights of the Round? If you do, you can win. If not, good luck. So it's better than that, but I still think that it's like it's not a super well designed fight. I do think that like sometimes it's just so easy to overwhelm enemies in this game because I think that I was reading about it. There's something in the code that the HP values only could go up so high, and so you end up just like if you just like push out offense, you just end up wiping everything out in like 2 minutes. So yeah, I just think it's to me. I'm not sure if this is a fair criticism of the game, but I do think that um, the battle system could be stronger.
I definitely see that, and like with the speed of the ATB, it's also always difficult to like you're queuing up for attacks, and when you haven't seen the first one yet, so it's hard to tell how it's all going to shake out. Um, Another thing that a potential remake could really do some work on is smoothing out some of the rougher edges of the battle system, hopefully without completely changing it. But Square Enix going to do what they do.
So yeah, I mean, my complaints about the battle system aside, we do end up going at this point to the final dungeon, which is Memoria, where we're sort of walking through a sequence of memories of the Zidane has, and you also end up fighting like the original four fiends from Final Fantasy One, which I remember the first time I played this game, I was like, "Wait a second, it's Lich! This is so cool!" And I just like the Garland references, and I just really enjoyed all those. But yeah, I think Memoria, despite the fact that I think the game would be better without it, I do think is a extremely cool idea for a final dungeon. And I do like the ending sequence, which we'll talk about. But did you guys also like Memoria?
I th- I think it's okay. Like I love the idea of it, and I love kind of what it's doing, I suppose. But in practicality, it's just kind of one long path with not really any sort of deviations from that path, or there's no like puzzles or anything. And I just feel a bit like, in comparison to the final dungeons in 7 and 8, especially just thinking of other PS1 Final Fantasies, it was lacking a bit for me.
Yeah, it's thematically interesting. It looks beautiful. It's got some interesting little gimmicks to it, but I agree that it's just kind of like the last hurdle more so than like a cool
Mhm.
experience, like gameplay experience at least.
I agree with that. It just feels like the last hurdle more than anything. But I do it. It's beautiful thematically. I love what it does. But yeah, as like an actual like dungeon to go through, it's kind of just another dungeon. There are random Tetramaster ghosts. So that's kind of a funny, funny touch.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out what that was when I was walking through. I was like, "What the hell?" Like, because Zidane
Yeah,
just like if you don't try to play Tetramaster, he looks up and he just like shakes his head and like, "What is happening here?"
yeah. No, it's a nice touch. It's pretty random. I wish they did have Moogles here too to add that. Um, instead of the random sort of save uh beams of light or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I take your guys' point about the linearity of it, and especially after again, it gets to like the idea of like to me, like the crescendo of act at the end of disc three here. Like it's like, well, now we just got to kind of go through this, and I like it thematically, but it could have been better. And then you get to the final fight with Kuja, who you take down, but then he casts Ultima at the end of the fight, which basically just wipes you out. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't know. Like, is the fight against Necron meant to happen in like some sort of like another world? Like, I'm not really sure. Like, you've got like this long speechifying from Garland throughout, and then you get this long speechifying from Necron about like sort of I am the inevitable or whatever the heck he says.
He gives the
Um,
full
With the
Yoda,
Yoda,
what the
yeah,
Sith.
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I wasn't really sure, like, if I was supposed to be fighting him in death, like I'm fighting against like the literal embodiment of like my fears and death. Like it's all a little on the nose for me. I like the fact that Necron's never been hinted at before is weird, I guess, but like I understand it. Uh, as it just sort of being like this embodiment of the fears that we all have, but also in particular that Kuja has sort of embodied. But I thought Kuja embodied them well enough already with his nihilism. So, like with his sort of like Kefka-esque nihilism that he has here. So, like, I don't know, man. Do you guys like Necron? Can you guys explain this to me? Make me like it.
Would that I could.
Yeah, I
I'm
think honestly you kind of already got it. Yeah, I think I just like I see it as like just a largely symbolic sort of fight. I don't really know where it is physically and stuff either, but I do like I don't know that everyone gets to have their moment before the fight too. Like even Kina gets a cute line. They're like, "I'll cook something for everyone once we're back or done" or something like that. I don't know. I like the character moments from that, but
Hmm.
the actual fight itself, yeah, I don't. I don't know physically where they are, um, but we're gonna fight God. So here we go. That's kind of just how I see it.
Get in the car, loser. We're fighting God.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Oh, I just also want to shout out Kuja. Battle music is fantastic. Just wanted to
so
say that.
good.
Also, the Necron music is also really good. But yeah, Kuja's battle version of his theme is it's one of my favorite um, final boss tracks from the series.
Yeah, that's one I've listened to a lot.
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's kind of an arse pull, kind of a situation. I feel like I understand what they were trying to do, and what they were trying to do isn't necessarily bad. The longer I've had to sit with it over the years, the more I've dealt with it. I understand kind of what it was aiming for, and I respect to a degree what was done there. But this is also a reference to classic Final Fantasy, where the last boss is going to be some random elder god pulled in at the last second to give you another form to the final boss of sorts.
Yeah, I think I read, and this might be an apocryphal story, I don't know, but like that actually, because like they're on your in Memoria, there's like this very hidden semi super boss that like gets you access to like the master synthesis. And it's Hades, and I think I read somewhere that Hades was originally planned as that final boss, not Necron. And it would have maybe put a little bit more of a fine point on what it was. The Hades fight's a little bit harder, but like I don't know, like it just feels I, like it wasn't really fully developed in terms of what they wanted to do.
Mm.
Oh yeah, did anyone get there in under 12 hours? Get the
No, I
No.
definitely did not.
Nope.
Yep.
It just doesn't sound fun.
No.
Like you could do it with fast forward pretty easily, I think, but I just don't really see the point of it.
I do think Necron looks cool though.
Yeah.
I'll give him that. He
Yeah.
he looks good.
He's been working out.
Grand Cross is a fun move.
Total side note, like which party did you guys roll with against Necron? Like what was like your sort of your final party going forward here?
I'm a classic sort of Zidane, Dagger, Steiner, Vivi.
That's the
Hey,
party.
twinsies.
That's the party I went with the first time I played it, and this time I was like, I am gonna not use any of those characters. Well, besides Zidane, I kept him. So I went with Freya, Amaranth, and Kina, and it was hard.
Yeah, Kina
It was-
heals are
It was harder
tricky.
than I was expecting, because I remember the first time I played it being really surprised at how easy the fight was. And I don't know if it was just that I got particularly lucky that time, but this one was tough. And I remember that there's a lot of status effects going on in this one, so I spent all of my ability gems like equipping the stuff to make me immune to the status effects generally. But I think I must have forgotten that. I think I must have forgotten to equip one of them on Kina, who got inflicted with stop like right at the beginning.
Oh jeez.
And I was kind of relying on them to put like auto life on everybody and to use Angel Snack when everyone else got inflicted with stuff. So instantly I was on a bit of a back foot, but I managed to get through it with I think Freya and Amaranth still alive at the end. Freya was doing good. Her dragon, is it Dragon's Crest, the one that increases the damage with the number of dragons you've killed? That was doing like maximum damage, so I just kept firing that off whenever she was alive.
Yeah,
But
that's Freya's real power move right there.
yeah, it was tough. I was surprised at how close this one was this time. Yeah, I've learnt my lesson. I'll bring a white mage next time.
Yeah, I mean, Ico still can do so much damage with Holy that, like, I was like, all right, I'm still getting a damage dealer here, really. So yeah, I used Ico and Amaranth and Steiner, since Steiner's shock pushes out max damage every time, and Zidane, which I didn't have his thievery all the way up, but thievery was still doing like 7-8k at this point, so it was pretty good. That was the same party I used against Ozma, and it worked just fine. So yeah, but like the reality is you can use anybody in this game, and I think Kina's very powerful as well. I think it's cool that like it actually still manages to make every character. I don't think any character has little value. The only person I think is probably I can't really see the value of Garnet over Ico, I guess. Maybe Arc, but other than that. It's very
It's
balanced.
it's Arc, and it's Arc because Arc is a freaking transforming giant robot. I don't care about the damage. I just want that animation in my veins. This was actually the first time I'd use the classic party. I usually mix it up a little bit, so it was kind of fun doing almost the vanilla experience all these years later. I had never given Steiner much of a chance. Once I had Freya, it was like, see you later. But he's a powerful character, and I like. I'm a big fan of like how sound design impacts how people feel, and the sound design on his armor and his strikes make Steiner feel so freaking heavy.
Yeah, yeah.
And I absolutely love it.
It's just one of the reasons I love Steiner in general. It's like part of like just like his general goofiness too. I think he's just great.
It's so good.
So yeah, that's the end of the game. Obviously, though, we get the ending where Kuja, I think, is the one who sort of revives us to fight Necron, baby, or he revives us after the fight with Necron because he realizes what he's done. And then Zidane, says like, he's my brother. I'm going to stay behind. I'm going to go save him. And then Kuja's like, wait, what the heck are you doing, dude? And then like sort of get this implication that maybe they died. And then, the final sequence you get in Alexandria where there's a play going on again. And I just think I think it's totally delightful that Zidane reveals himself to Garnet. I just thought it was like, I am not really a sucker for romance in video games because I usually think they're pretty bad. But this time I was actually very moved by it. Like sort of the running between them and just, that they're coming back together. And I think the stuff with Freya was really cool. Her sort of reestablishing that relationship with the Dragoon that has amnesia, and Vivi is sort of, the leader of the Black Mages. And I just think it's all, I just think the ending is fantastic.
When Zidane whips off the cloak, I cry every time. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm such a sap for it, but it hits me every last time.
Yeah, no, I love this ending so much. Yeah, whenever I want to get in my feelings or whatever, I just pull this up on YouTube and watch it. It's such a good ending. How it ties up every character's arc, Vivi's like fate and everything, and sort of how he learned to or like fully embrace his like limited lifespan and everything. Sort of the lessons learned throughout the journey. Yeah, it's beautiful. I love it. The moment before, like even before all that, like Zidane and Dagger, Zidane being like, "This is as far as I can take you for the kidnapping thing or whatever." It's a cute callback to the beginning. Steiner like lets them have their moment. Like it's very There's just so much to this ending that I'm like, I love it all. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I fully agree with everybody. It's amazing. I'm such a sucker for an ending that shows you like what the characters kind of go on to do next. And I think this one does it really well. I think Freya's little section was probably my favorite. I kind of maybe wouldn't have expected that, but I feel like it kind of shows off a lot about what Final Fantasy IX is kind of trying to do just in her little scene. Like her and Sir Fratley are sitting on the fountain in still ruined Bermesia, and you have this moment first of kind of feeling happy for her when he tells her that he loves her, and then she like puts her head on him and you just see her like thought rather than her speech. You just see her thought saying something like, you just can't remember me from before or something, which is kind of heartbreaking. And it's this really kind of nice moment where you kind of don't know whether to feel happy or sad for her, and you've got a mix of both of those emotions going on like at the same time. You've got the depth in that moment being given to you, and I feel like that is kind of what Final Fantasy IX generally does so well. It has these like really kind of joyful moments that are underpinned with a kind of subtler sadness or heaviness to them. Yeah, I really love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, I think that just absolutely hits the nail on the head. It is just such a masterpiece in tonality, and I think that is. I didn't really think about that moment as deeply as you just described it, but that just like it's absolutely right. Yeah, it's I think that for all my criticisms of this game, for all the things that I think it could have done better, it's just like such a pure experience. Um, and I think that that sort of that mix of tonality, it just feels so genuine and so earnest all the time, that it's just like hard not to fall in love with it. So we've been talking about this game for a while, maybe longer than we should have, but that's okay because I still have one last final question. So we've played a lot of Final Fantasy on Retro Encounter over the years. We played 5, we played 4, 6, 12 I think years ago. 10 was one of the first ones that we ever did. So obviously we love Final Fantasy here at Retro Encounter. If you're sort of like placing Final Fantasy 9, like what are sort of your overall like sort of impressions of the game in terms of where it falls in like sort of the overall Final Fantasy oeuvre? If you're going to place it somewhere, you don't have to rank it if you don't want to. Know some people don't like that. I do, but sort of where do you think it falls in sort of the overall spectrum of the 16 games we have to talk about?
FF9 has been my favorite forever, and replaying it, it's still top of the heap for me. I don't think anything does. It's the tone that sells me. It's being able to weave in joyful and melancholy, in a way that, man, I don't know that many other Final Fantasy games do. You can kind of interpret some of the SNES games that way, in a way that makes them stand out. But being able to do that, um, a little further into the lifespan, I want more of this out of Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy has definitely become built on a lot more melodrama, a lot more angst, and being a lot more serious. Not 100% of the time, but it's definitely where the avenue has gone. And I love this tone where things get darker because the brights are brighter. And I love this cast and how lovable and um, just joyful and rounded they are. That they're not just one thing. Um, I think this is. I don't know that anything's ever going to usurp FF9. I'm willing for it too. I've had a couple of close calls, but this is still what Final Fantasy should be to me.
Just adding to that, yeah, this is my first Final Fantasy, and it has stayed my favorite since then. Yeah, this is my favorite one, which means technically it was all downhill from here, but I'm just kidding. No, I love the rest of the games too. But yeah, no, FF9 is really special to me. Everything that Wes said, I feel like these characters are so fully fleshed out. Their arcs are mapped out really well. I love how it tackles sort of those themes of death and embracing life and creating your own meaning in life, despite like what society sort of tells you to be or wants you to be. Um, I love how each of these characters struggles with that in their own way and finds their own sort of like answers to like what do you do with your life? What do you do with your limited amount of time? Um, I love the vibe, the aesthetic of it. I like the mixing of medieval fantasy with sci-fi elements. Yeah, I love the vibe of it. Yeah, no, this is my favorite Final Fantasy. I think I've definitely had games come close and everything. And I'd love to have one top it, but yeah, this is just my favorite one. I think personally, just there's so much nostalgia to it for me too. Having it be my first one, my first experience of Final Fantasy, like this is what I think of when I think of the series.
I think for me, this is my second favorite Final Fantasy game. My first being Final Fantasy VIII. Um,
I respect the hell out of it. Thank you.
Speaking of hot takes.
um, and yeah, for the same reason that Mario and Wes have already said, I just think Final Fantasy IX is, for me, it's probably the most unique in the series. For a future Final Fantasy game, if I was to choose one that I've played that I would like it to be similar to, it would be Final Fantasy IX. I just think it's an an aesthetic that Final Fantasy as a series could definitely do more with. I feel like it hasn't really. There's been a lot of kind of sci-fi fantasy Final Fantasy games, but there haven't been as many, especially recently, like full-on fantasy. And I think um, there's definitely some inspiration that Square Enix could take from Final Fantasy. I think for a new entry. But yeah, I think it just stands really strongly on its own. It's got a wonderful cast of characters. The story is amazing. I love the world. Um, yeah, it's really really great.
I guess I'm going to come in here with a semi-hot take, at least compared to where you guys are. For the record, I think it's very clear from the last 3 hours of us chatting about this game that I really really love this game, but I'm not sure if it would actually hit like top five for me at this point. And it's only because like I think like some of the pacing stuff is a little bit wonky. Some of the gameplay itself, I think, is not super fun sometimes. And I think most people who know this, I am a stan for where Final Fantasy is now, in a way that I know that some people are not. I mean, like, if you want to talk about traditional fantasy, 16 really kind of is that in a lot of ways. But I know obviously tonally it is very different from this game, and a lot of people don't like that direction. That's okay. I actually think that like the remake trilogy is definitely sort of like grabbing part of that joy mixed with pathos, but obviously it gets much more melodramatic in a lot of ways. But there's also a lot of joy to be found in them, and they really lead into Cloud's goofiness and things like that. And so, I think about like the systems in 12. I just really love those. 6 is hard to top for me. But you're right. I mean, like everything you guys have said is absolutely correct in terms of what is good about 9. And I think that I am super glad that I went back to it. I like it way more than I liked it the first time, because I think I'm just like mature enough to really understand what it's doing. And I am super excited that I got to talk about it with the three of you who all love this game, and your love was very obvious. And I learned so much about the themes of this game talking to the three of you. So thank you, all three of you, for chatting with me about this game.
Thank you for
Complete
having
delight.
us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So that is the end of our chat about Final Fantasy IX. So we should talk about what is coming up. So next week, we're going to be continuing our conversation. Not next week, but 2 weeks from now. We're going to be continuing conversations about Sakaguchi, and some of the themes that we talked about here will come up. We're going to be talking about, an episode exclusively about Hironobu Sakaguchi's sort of overall oeuvre, sort of where he started, where he ended, sort of his themes, the ideas that he comes back to. We have a totally different panel from this, so we'll get some different takes on that. I thought that it was an appropriate place to go after sort of like Sakaguchi's, semi swan song, sort of the apotheosis of Sakaguchi in some ways. And then after that, we're going to have 2 episodes on Tales of Grace's F, which I'm very excited to play. I've played a few Tales games. I hear great things about the battle system. Wes is joining us on those episodes, so I'm excited to chat about that.
Gotta jump in some Tails love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually know a lot of what's coming up after that, because I've planned out Retro Encounter to like the end of April now, which is crazy. But I will say this: there is going to be a draft episode coming back. I'm not going to say what it is, but I will say that as I've taken over the Retro Encounter inbox, like one of the most consistent themes is like we love draft episodes, and I'm like, well, all right, let's bring them back. And so we've got a couple of them in the pipeline, but I know for sure what one of them will be. But I will wait to tell you what that's going to be about in a couple weeks. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can email me, as I just discussed, retro@rpgfan.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, The Bad Place, Blue Sky, Twitch, YouTube. We're usually RPG Fan or RPG Fan.com. We also have an RPG Fan Discord. You can also support us by shopping at our shops. We have 2 different storefronts, one for the TeePublic, where you can buy t-shirts, mugs. There was recently a post on social media of one of our staff members wearing a very cool t-shirt, rep an RPG Fan. And then you also have Hyperplay, which has published a review card book that has 300 pages of review cards that you may have seen on Instagram, all collected together lovingly. It's a really cool book. And if you like the look of those, that's really worth checking out. We also have 2 other fine podcasts: Random Encounter, which is every other Monday about randomness, usually what we're playing now, current things like that. And then the other Monday is Rhythm Encounter about RPG music. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify. If you can find podcasts there, we're usually there. And let's talk about how to get in touch with the individuals on the panel. If you want to tell Rob why he's wrong about Vivi, you can email or get in touch with him. How?
On Blue Sky, Neon Cowboy, but I'm not wrong.
And if you want to tell Mario why he's wrong about Tetramaster, you can get in touch with him. How?
You can find me on the RPG Fan socials, so Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, Twitter, and Blue Sky, RPG Fan or RPG Fan.com.
And I can't really think of anything I disagree with Wes on. So if you want to tell
I'm
Wes
never
why
wrong.
Wes is right about everything, how can you get in touch with Wes?
If you want to come agree with my fantastic takes, I'm on Blue Sky at Lone Weasel.
And if you want to tell me why Memoria is the greatest dungeon in the history of Final Fantasy, you can get in touch with me by email, zachw@rpgfan.com, or I'm also on our Discord as ZachW. So anyway, again, thank the three of you for chatting with me, coming on. I appreciated getting your expertise, and I hope, listeners, that you enjoyed listening to these three fine people talk about one of their favorite games of all time. And thank you, good night, and good luck.